Hey, everybody. Welcome to Resiliency Radio, your go-to podcast for the most cutting-edge insights in integrative and functional medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Jill, and with each episode, we dive into the heart of healing and personal transformation. Join me as I interview renowned experts, medical thought leaders, and everyone in between to bring you insightful and fun and very hopefully practical advice to optimize your health and well-being and even performance. I always, just like you, learn right alongside you. I love interviewing these guests and look forward to sharing each week new information with you. This week, you're going to love new insights on integrative mental health with Kirkland Newman, my guest. I will introduce her in just a moment. But before I do, I want to remind you that you can find all products that have been curated for your health needs at drjillhealth.com. We have only the very best. And if you're looking at a condition like mast cell activation, chronic Lyme disease, Epstein-Barr reactivation, or just fatigue, you can find bundles there as well. I've put together some bundles to make it easy. One of our best-selling bundles is the mast cell bundle, MCAS. Another one is the Epstein-Barr bundle. And a third one that is always popular is the SIBO-CIFO bundle, which has 3 products to help you treat your bacterial and fungal overgrowth in the gut. So if you're not sure where to start and you're looking for great quality products, you can go to drjillhealth.com. As you probably know, you can also find my beauty line, clean, beautiful products to help your skin glow at drjillhealth.com as well. And I've shared with you some of my favorites. One that is absolutely probably my top seller is Biopeptide Beauty Cream. This one I do not travel without. Love, love, love. I used to use retinols, but in Colorado it's so dry. My skin would be flaky and dry, and they're good. They have good evidence, but I find this to be just as good for anti-aging and wrinkles without the drying. So it's a fantastic option. I used it before bed, and it is literally my don't go without Biopeptide Beauty Cream, which you can find at drjillhealth.com. Okay, on to our show. Let me introduce our guest. Kirkland Newman is an Anglo-American journalist and philanthropist. She is the founder and editor of MindHealth360, a free global resource for integrative mental health and functional medicine psychiatry, and the host of Mind Health 360 show. Been a guest on that, and it's so fun. She's an amazing interviewer. She created Mind Health 360 after her own postpartum depression to address the epidemic of mental health issues and the lack of sustainable root cause-based solutions for mental health in the mainstream medicine. She launched this Mind Health 360 show in 2020, giving voice to the leading practitioners in integrative and mental health. She had some amazing guests, as you can hear from our interview today. She is a co-founder and trustee of the Horizon Foundation, providing support for young refugees from the Middle East. She's first-class BA, MA founder from Oxford University in modern languages and literatures. And I could go on and on, but she's just an incredible human being who is now putting on the IMMH conference. We'll talk a little bit about that today. If you're a practitioner, you can join in San Diego, September, either live or virtual. But let me go ahead and first welcome Kirkland Newman to the show. Kiki, it is so exciting to be here with you. And as we're recording this shortly, I'm going to be visiting you in London. I can't wait to actually see you in person. We're talking today about updates in integrative medicine and mental health. And you and I, right before we got on, are just talking about, we both love functional integrative medicine. We both know tons of practitioners, and we have a lot of practitioners who listen to the show. But today I want to dive deep into all the realms and some of the new and upcoming things, especially somatic therapy, trauma therapies. Before I do, tell us a little bit about how did you get interested in this field? What was your journey into being the, collaborator and kind of founder now taking over the IMMH conference?
So thank you so much, Jill, for having me. And you've always been a hero of mine. And you and I first met at the IMMH conference several years ago. I think it was in Orange County or in some
Mhm.
place in California. And you have always been such an inspiration because of your journey, which has been very personal and then very professional, and also your what you do and how you treat clinically and the research that you use, and also your presentations are really second to none. So first of all, hats off for that. And you really are a leader and a pioneer in this field. And second of all, in terms of my story, so I had no intention of getting into the health space. I did a master's in French and Spanish literature. Then I did a master's in European studies. The first one was at Oxford. The second one was at LSE. And then I did a master's in Middle Eastern studies studies at SOAS, the University of London. And I had a very checkered career. I worked for Rockefeller Brothers Fund. I worked for Ogilvy and Mather. I worked for the Prince's Trust. I did Europe's largest hip hop festival with Jay-Z and Beyonce and Alicia
Wow,
Keys.
I had no idea all this stuff. It's amazing.
Yeah, and so I was a fundraiser. I started I started an internet startup in the early 2000s as well. So I've had a very varied career. And then I was set to do a PhD on the Middle Eastern conflict. That was really my passion. And I got postpartum depression after the birth of my first child, which I was offered drugs, I was offered SSRIs, I was offered tranquilizers. I refused them all. And then I fixed it with nutrition and meditation. And that was fine. It took about a year and a half, and it really affected my immune system. And I was sick all the time as well. On top of having panic and anxiety attacks, I was sick a lot. I would have every stomach bug, every flu, etc. But I didn't really have depression. I had more anxiety, panic, and then weak immune system. And then after the birth of my second child, I had a much worse postpartum depression. And I was completing my master's in Middle Eastern studies. And I was writing my dissertation, in fact, on the battle for victimhood between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And about 9 months after that, I developed this terrible postpartum depression where I couldn't get out of bed. I was crying all the time. I couldn't sleep. And so it took me about 3 years to be able to sleep properly. I was sleeping maybe 3, 4, 5 hours a night. And as you know, if you don't sleep for that period of time, I just had a complete breakdown. And there I did accept the drugs. I was put on mirtazapine. I was put on Zopiclone, which is a sleeping pill, one of the Z drugs. And I was told by my psychiatrist I would be on these indefinitely. And after a few months of being on them, they provided immediate relief. So I stopped having panic attacks. I was able to sleep. And so that was a huge relief. And my first reaction was, wow, why has no one told me about this sooner? Like, these are great, these drugs. Like, why is everyone so afraid of antidepressants? But gradually, in fact, strangely, my mood got worse and worse and worse. My energy levels got worse and worse to the point where I couldn't get out of bed. I was constantly crying. I was constantly, and then I started noticing that my nails were super brittle. My hair was falling out. I had all these weird symptoms, and I was feeling much worse even than I had when I had the sort of panic, anxiety, and insomnia. And so I said to my psychiatrist, look, these aren't working for me. And she kept upping the dose till I was on really a mega dose. I was on 40 milligrams of mirtazapine or Zispin or Rimrun, whatever you want to call it. And I said, look, I don't want to be on these. And she said, well, you'll be on these indefinitely. And I said, I've never been on a psych med before. I don't understand why I need these. And she said, well, it's just you're depressed, and that's that. Anyway, I started doing my own research, and not one of my 5 or 6 doctors, I saw an endocrinologist, I saw 2 OBGYNs, I saw several psychiatrists, psychologists, I was doing some CBT. No one ever said, let's look at your nutrition status, let's look at your hormones, let's look at all the biochemical stuff that's going on. Not one of them. Through my own research, and I have to say the first book I read, somebody gave me, it was Susan Summers'
Oh,
Breakthroughs.
yeah.
And, and she, for whatever, so I started reading her book and I thought this makes a lot of sense. And I started this odyssey. I went to Belgium. I saw Thierry Hertog, who's a hormone doctor, who's quite controversial. And he gave me a list of hormones as long as my arm. I came back to London. I saw Marion Gluck at the Marion Gluck Clinic. I saw an endocrinologist there. And all of a sudden, my eyes were open to this whole alternative approach, which no one had told me about. I started seeing a nutritionist who tested my heavy metals, my food intolerances, my gut, etc. And it turned out I had, all these imbalances in my HPA axis. I had very low DHEA, very abnormal cortisol rhythms. I had very low progesterone, very low estrogen, very high copper, very low zinc, low B12, very low omegas. Very low vitamin D. And so all these things
Everything your brain needed, right? Like you just
everything.
name the list of like the top 5 to 10 nutrients.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
And no one had tested this. And as I started to figure this out, it became very obvious why I was depressed, why I was having insomnia, why I was so panicky. I had a very high mercury load, I had a very high lead load, I had gut dysbiosis, I had leaky gut, and I had a very serious gluten intolerance. None of this, I had any idea about until I started doing all these tests. I then started working with Dr. Sarah Gottfried. And this was back in 2011, and she was doing all these webinars on adrenals and, women's health. And my whole world was blown up because I discovered functional medicine, and I thought, wow, why is no one talking about this in the UK, which is where I was based? But also, she was saying that only 1% of practitioners in the US practice functional medicine. And I thought, why is this not more well known? So then I made it my mission. I went away from the sort of Israel-Palestine conflict, and I said, this is going to be my mission, is to raise awareness and provide resources around integrative mental health and functional medicine psychiatry. So I started a website called MindHealth360. I then started a podcast called The MindHealth360 Show. This was in 2020. And then I took over from Dr. Shaw of Great Plains Labs, IMMH, which is Integrative Medicine for Mental Health, which had been going since about 2009 and had started very small.
Yeah.
It was founded by Dr. James Greenblatt and Dr. Shaw with 50 people in a room, grew to about 500. And last year we did it in person. We had 700 people.
Wow.
And this year we're doing it again in San Diego from the 11th to the 14th of September. And, there's a real need for this type of medicine, both for, practitioner training, which is what IMMH is, and also for patients and their families, because there's such a need for this type of approach. And the way I look at it is, if you want to sustainably heal mental health, you really need to look at three areas. The first is the biochemical, which is your gut, your hormones, your nutrition, your toxins, your infections, your inflammation, your genes. The second is psychospiritual, which is your trauma, your adverse life experiences, your chronic stress, your lack of purpose and meaning, difficult life circumstances. And the third is your lifestyle behavioral. So sleep, sunlight, exercise, essentially. And only by looking at these three baskets can you really sustainably heal mental health. So that's a long-winded version of why I started what I started and why I'm so passionate, because I really believe that we need a revolution in the way mental health is diagnosed and treated. And, I ended up weaning myself. And it took me 6 months to wean myself off my drugs without my psychiatrist's approval. I'm not recommending that, but that's what I had to do. I had huge rebound insomnia. It took me 3 years to regulate my biochemistry and my stress response so that I could handle it. I nearly checked myself into a psychiatric institute. I was desperate. And, in the end of the day, what stopped my panic attacks in their tracks were simple breathing exercise that was, taught to me by a psychologist, which was just 4 in, hold 4, 8 out. He recorded it on my phone. Every time I started feeling a panic attacks beginning, I would do this exercise. And, through my own journey, I realized that there are so many tools that we have in our arsenal to treat mental health and that are not in the mainstream. There are so many root causes to mental health, be they hormone dysregulation, nutritional imbalances, Lyme disease, toxins, etc. And through, my work, I've learned so much about all these different factors that can be contributing to mental health and also ways that we can address it that are not in the mainstream. So I'm passionate about revolutionizing mental health by bringing this awareness and education both to lay people, patients, their friends, families, and health practitioners. So I will now shut up, but that's my story.
So good, Kiki. And thank you for sharing your personal experience. I don't think I knew the depth of what you had personally gone through. And I just want to highlight real quickly, because like I said, you literally named off the top 10, at least, things that are contributing. So people may not know celiac disease, non-celiac gluten sensitivity. They think of it as a gut issue, gas or bloating or malabsorption. The truth is about 50% present with mental health issues, depression, anxiety, insomnia, daytime fatigue, and I see it all the time. In fact, it was always a joke back in the day when I first started functional medicine. I'd help a mother with her hormones, and she'd send her college kid. So it'd usually be a young man, 19 years old. And we're talking through it, and like, I'm having depression, anxiety. I can't get through my studies. I'm having trouble with college. And like, okay, da 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 da. Da, and we need to do a stool test. And it was so funny to see the look on their face. They're like, this young man and me giving them like, here's the poop test. But back to the whole celiac, the zonulin issue, and then also what you mentioned, dysbiosis. A lot of people have LPS endotoxemia, which is this bacterial leakage into the gut, from the gut into the bloodstream, which is a really potent inflammatory thing that can contribute to depression, anxiety, insomnia. So this gut connection, you mentioned zinc and copper. We test this for not only mental health, but cognitive function. Super common to have those imbalance. You mentioned heavy metals. And these are all things that the conventional doc you go to is probably not going to look at or test or even know. And God bless them, they just don't know any better. It's not that they're not trying to help you, but they've been taught, like I was in medical school, that you have depression, you give an SSRI. You don't look at hormones, you mentioned cortisol curve, you mentioned female hormones like progesterone, which can be calming and GABAergic, and on and on and on. But I love that. I just wanted to highlight it because as people are listening, they might be suffering like you were. I don't know what the stats are, Kiki. Do you know? I think I heard over COVID that prescriptions for antidepressants went up by about 400%.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I know that anxiety went up by, I think, 40%, and it was already very, very high before. And I know depression has gone up. COVID has been hugely detrimental to everyone's mental health, the isolation, and there's the epidemic that was already before COVID has now just gathered steam, essentially.
And
Yeah.
then the inflammation, because you also mentioned there are hidden infections like Lyme or Epstein-Barr. And I'm seeing a lot of long COVID, post-COVID, where people have semi-permanent or at least 6 to 12 to 18 months of inflammatory cytokines from the infection that maintain for months afterwards and absolutely affect brain, affect blood flow to the brain, affect, because the T cells are diminished, other infections that were just hanging around, not minding their own business, not bothering the patient, like CMV or Epstein-Barr or any herpetic virus or any Borrelia or Lyme infections, all of a sudden pop their head up because their immune system isn't functional. So this, if you're listening, this may sound very complex, but I think the core message is what you said, Kiki. I am so passionate, like you, about getting the word out to other practitioners because we need critical thinkers and problem solvers in the realm of medicine that are looking outside the box, comes back to your conference. Tell us just briefly now about, we'll talk about this at the end too, and it'll be in the show notes. What's the dates again? Who is it for? And what are you covering this year?
Thank you so much. No, it's fantastic because the other thing is, just before I talk about the conference, there's a disconnect between the amount of research and evidence that is out there. We know that, for instance, there are hundreds of thousands of papers on the gut-brain connection, most on animal models. That's the only thing. But there's a lot of research that's out there that's not getting into mainstream clinical practice. And so one of the things we're trying to do with the conference, which is IMMH, Integrative Medicine for Mental Health, the 11th to the 14th of September in San Diego, is to really bring that research to the fore, essentially, and bring the clinical practice to the fore as well. And it's for health practitioners, whether they're MDs, DOs, and there's a large proportion of them, nurse practitioners, physician associates, psychologists, psychotherapists, nutritionists, naturopaths, chiropractors, social workers, and even passionate lay people. And so it's to really showcase the latest research on these biochemical imbalances mainly, but also on the psychospiritual side and the lifestyle behavioral side, and also the best clinical practice so that they can go away after 4 days of, it's quite intense. And we're covering a whole number of topics. So we've got Dr. Gabor Maté, who will be talking about the sort of the biology and the brain, the body and brain connection, and the effects of sort of chronic stress on our physiology. Dr. Emran Meyer will be talking about the gut-brain immune connection. He's a gastroenterologist at UCL. Dr. Robert Lustig and Dr. Matt Bernstein will be talking about metabolic psychiatry. We have Dr. Dale Bredesen, who will be talking about Alzheimer's, and him and Kat Toops, Dr. Kat Toops, and also Heather Sanderson will be doing a whole afternoon on Alzheimer's and on their latest research on preventing and even reversing Alzheimer's. We have, who else do we have? I mean, we have quite a few wonderful speakers. We have a lovely postdoc from Princeton called Dr. Alexis Cohen, who will be speaking about circadian rhythm, sleep, and blue light and the effects of those on mental health, and especially on your mitochondria. Dr. Bob Roundtree will be speaking about mitochondria and mental health. Dr. Naisha Winters will be speaking about cancer and mental health. I always try and add one person who's a bit left field. And last year we had Dr. Asim Malhotra, who's a cardiologist, talk about the heart-brain connection. She will be talking about sort of metabolism, mitochondria, but also the cancer mental health connection. We have Patrick McEwen, who is a wonderful breathwork practitioner, whose latest work is about training mental health practitioners to work with the breath, because that's such an important part. We have JJ Virgin, who will be talking about exercise and muscle and the importance of muscle actually as a neuroendocrine organ and as a source of sort of biochemical neurochemistry. So apparently your muscle acts as an endocrine and a neurohormone, which I had no idea about. It's so fascinating. We have Dr. Joe Pizzorno, who will be talking about toxins and mental health. Dr. Neil Nathan, who will be talking about mold and Lyme and mental health. So we really, there are so many more, but we really, Dr. Arwin Podesta on addiction and mental health. So we're trying to cover a whole number of bases. Dr. James Greenblatt, of course, will be talking about ADHD and mental health. And so we really are trying to cover sort of nutritional psychiatry, metabolic psychiatry. We have 2 sessions on genomics with Dr. Sharon Hausman Cohen and another one whose name I'm forgetting, Lisa Gray, Erica Gray, and so essentially, and that looks at like the sort of new science of genomics and how certain SNPs really impact our mental health and epigenetics and what we can do about them. So we're really trying to cover really the full gamut of depression, anxiety, addiction, and looking at genomics and metabolic psychiatry, nutritional psychiatry, the gut-brain connection, toxicity, and really cover as much as we can in those 4 days with people who are real experts in the field, who can then, showcase both to people, practitioners who are new to this area and are new to functional medicine completely, to people who are much more experienced. And really, it's across the board. And anybody who's interested or invested or working with people with mental health, which is most practitioners, yeah, there'll be something in it for them, because it's, and it's really trying to say, look, mental health is so much more than treating the symptoms with SSRIs. There are so many root causes. So we're looking really at a root cause, personalized precision approach to mental health treatment. And as far as I know, there is no other conference or platform out there that combines integrative approaches, functional medicine, specifically in the realm of mental health. So, I'm really grateful and excited about being able to be part of this movement and this community, because that really is what it is. It's a community and a movement of practitioners coming together to say we need better ways to deal with this. And just one final thing, the theme of this year's conference is the anthropogenic drivers of mental health. Healing the individual, the community, and the planet. And it's looking really at what we're doing as a society, whether it's, our phones. We have Dr. Don Grant, who'll be talking about devices and attachment, or whether it's toxins, or whether it's processed foods, and what can we do about this? And we also have Dr. William Walsh from the Walsh Protocol, who is, one of the original biochemists who's worked with Abraham Hoffer and Carl Pfeiffer, who will be speaking at the age of 89. So, it's very exciting.
Kiki, I'm blown away. I did not know the list of speakers, and you just named the who's who of our world. Like, I'm blown away by the caliber, the quality that you put into this. And I've been to hundreds and hundreds of conferences over 20 years, spoke at many of them, and I'm like, holy cow, I don't want to miss this conference. So, I mean, so impressive, because you really, and I love the quality and caliber of the kinds of research you're bringing, because That's what's going to take us to the next level. And you're doing it. And obviously with the numbers that you've just explained, I get so excited about that, about changing the landscape. So I'm going to be there. Hey, everybody, just a quick break to remind you, if you haven't yet subscribed, click the subscribe button below. If you're listening on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you listen to podcasts, would you please leave us a review? Thank you so much. Let's get back to the show. You can
Well,
count.
you and also Jill, don't forget. So the first year I took it over, it was online, and you
Yeah.
did a brilliant talk on the gut-brain connection. Brilliant. And you're also speaking in 2026.
Yes.
I'm making sure of that.
Oh,
And you yourself are absolutely brilliant, and I can't wait for you to be part of it because I think, it is a smallish community of change agents, and I'm really a stickler for making sure that we have credibility, we have evidence-based research, and we have fantastic leaders in the field because, last year we had a large number of psychiatrists, MDs,
wow.
who had never heard of integrative medicine. They'd never heard of, well, they'd heard of it, but they were really new to it. So conventional psychiatrists who had seen a Facebook ad, I met 3 or 4 of them, and who were like, we like those speakers, so we came, and they were blown away. And that's what I want. And I know that's what you want, is to bring conventional medicine on this journey, which sometimes is more challenging because it maybe takes more time, or it takes more research, or it takes more effort on behalf of the patient or the practitioner and the practitioner. But essentially, I think for practitioners and patients who really care and really want sustainable results, to me, it's the only way. So, I'm so excited to be able to bring this to the world, and have access to all these amazing pioneers.
I love it. And it's so interesting as I heard your history. Sometimes I feel like the divine kind of leads all these things, all these experiences up until what we're really meant to do, right? And we think it's something else. Like you thought it was your dissertation or whatever else. And now I'm like, you are so where you're supposed to be, making such an impact. And this is going to continue to grow. I have no question. In my 20 plus years of practicing functional medicine, what I've seen is way back in the day, I was with a hospital system in Illinois, and no one knew integrative functional medicine. I was off in a clinic. I helped the hospital build an integrative medical center, and all the gastroenterologists, the rheumatologists, like, I don't know what that weird Dr. Jill is doing over there, but she's a quack, and I mean, whatever, right? But I knew number one, just like you, from the day I stepped out of medical school as a graduate, my job is to bridge great science and push the edge, because what you mentioned is so true. The studies coming out now are actually, there's a lot of proof for nutritional interventions, gut interventions. The microbiome is exponentially increasing, and every topic that you mentioned has a lot of great research, and it is continuing to grow. But back in the day, what I knew to be true is I would just forge ahead and one-on-one make a difference in that patient's life. And what happened, Kiki, is over my 3 years there, patients would start to heal from their RA, and they'd go off the meds, and they'd go back to the rheumatologist. The rheumatologist would be like, what are you doing? They're like, well, this Dr. Jill did this and that. And so what happened was the testimony of those patients healing started to go around the community. And all of a sudden, it wasn't me shouting from the rooftop. It wasn't me trying to prove anything. It was just me putting my head down and making a difference one in the patient's lives. And then their stories coming back. And all of a sudden, there was a shift, and these doctors who had no interest in what I was doing were like, what are you doing over there? And we started a community, a group of integrative practitioners in that area, that every, once a month we get together. It became hundreds in that community. And so like you, I've always had this deep passion of how do we bring docs together, and they don't have to necessarily even change the way they practice, but even if they think outside the box, to ask about diet, to ask about sleep, to ask about blue light, to ask about breath work. And maybe, just maybe, if they even know someone that can help, they don't have to even do it themselves. They can refer. So speaking of sleep and blue light and this, I want to talk a little bit about, you said one of the most profound things in your journey was just learning basic breath work. What would you say are some of the low-hanging fruits that maybe someone doesn't need to see a practitioner and they could start if they're suffering from anxiety and depression and look at right now?
It's such a good question. It's one of the things I really want to write about, in fact, is that low-hanging fruit. Because one of the criticisms of functional medicine is it can be expensive, it can involve a lot of testing, it can be very onerous and resource draining in terms of finances and time. There are so many low-hanging fruits. I think the first one is really circadian rhythm. So a lot of people with depression and anxiety have trouble with sleep, or they have trouble with their circadian rhythms. And one of the key things is we know more and more now that getting exposed to light in the morning is so important for your mitochondria. And getting exercise when you're, getting that light in the morning really improves your ATP production in your mitochondria. It makes your mitochondria so much more efficient. And it's that combination of light exposure and exercise. So even if it's just getting out for a brisk walk in the morning and getting that light in your eyes, on your skin, and getting your blood flowing, I think that's super important. Same at nighttime, it's like reducing that exposure to blue light, because as Dr. Alexis Cohen and a lot of her cohorts have proven, is that blue light is incredibly detrimental to your mitochondria. And so, it really drains your ATP and your energy. And it's so important not to be exposed to that blue light from your screens. And we're exposed all day long to that blue light, but because we have the full spectrum, it's less of a problem. But at night, we're not supposed to have that level of blue light. And getting the infrared light is very important. We used to sit around campfires at night, and now we don't. And so we don't have access to that infrared, which is also so important to our, neurochemicals and to our mitochondria. So I would say, getting sunlight in the morning with some exercise, and then at night having fewer screens, having a bedtime routine. And if sleep is an issue, I mean, there's so many wonderful sleep hacks like Epsom salt baths, having a sort of wind down routine, not having any light or any noise in the bedroom. I personally have always struggled with insomnia, well, since my postpartum depression. And one of the things that really works for me is meditation. And so if I can't sleep, I could lie there literally all night and not fall asleep. But if I sit up in my bed and I just meditate and I do breath work and meditation, I change the waves. So, we usually probably, when I have insomnia, I probably have beta waves,
Yeah.
which are very stimulating. And it's when I meditate, I bring them down to alpha or to theta or delta. And, that change in brain waves through meditation is incredibly soporific, and it really does work for me, at least. Another trick is, light legs up against the wall. So you lie against the floor, put your legs up, which is an old yoga trick, but that seems to work as well. And I think so none of that costs anything. Meditation for me has been absolutely crucial. And I try and do it 30 minutes a day. And I try to incorporate humming because that tones the vagus nerve. And so I sort of do deep breathing, which tones the vagus nerve, and also sort of hum when I breathe out, which also contributes to toning the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is so important for your gut health and for your nervous system regulation. None of those things cost anything, but they're so important. Community, going out and being able to connect with people is so important. And we're so disconnected in our world of, phones and just, in our worlds of essentially loneliness. I mean, there's a lot of loneliness. There's a lot of disconnection, and being able to join a community, whether it's a book club or a dance class or something that gives you joy, and I mean, Trudy Scott, for instance, would say, well, you should check yourself for cryptopyroluria and
Yeah.
see if maybe you have social anxiety because you have a lack of B6
Infection.
and lack of zinc, right?
Yeah.
So there's also that whole biochemical piece in terms of the food, try to eat a diet of whole foods, no processed foods, cut out sugar. I mean, Robert Lustig is the sugar expert. It's a mitochondrial poison, sugar. And so really cutting out sugar, eating whole foods, trying to eat. Obviously, as you know, there's a huge movement towards ketogenic diet, so high fat, low carb, because they found that the brain works well on ketones and that it's very good for cognition. And, Dr. Chris Palmer, who was at IMMH last year, he's written a wonderful book called Brain Energy, which is all about how, the brain really needs its energy and its mitochondrial energy not to have depression or cognitive decline or anxiety. All these things, and whole foods can cost less than processed foods. And, you can have sort of simple, I mean, I eat cabbage or,
Yeah.
which can be really good, and lean meats, etc. What else? I mean, things like yoga, meditation, anything that calms the nervous system. Because one of the things that I'm finding more and more is that it's all very well to look at the biochemistry and to look at the mold and the Lyme, etc. But a lot of this has to do with nervous system regulation. A lot of our mental health really boils down to how resilient are we from a nervous system perspective. And if we've suffered from childhood trauma or chronic stress, we'll be less resilient. We're primed, our systems are primed to be overreactive. And they talk about a Lyme personality or a mold personality. So people who are more prone to getting Lyme disease or mold toxicity. And there's a very high correlation with people who've had childhood trauma. And so, being able to regulate your nervous system and keep it regulated is so important. And that doesn't mean that you have to be calm all the time, but it means that you have very good vagal efficiency. So your vagal tone, works well. It is very adaptive to your circumstances, and that's a form of resilience. And your nervous system can adapt to whatever circumstances so that you're reacting appropriately. I'm jumping around a bit, but I just wanted to say there are so many ways of essentially low-hanging fruit, whether it's from sleep regulation, circadian rhythms, a diet of whole foods, connection, and trying to do things that really regulate your nervous system and your vagal tone. Those are all really important and they don't cost anything.
I love that. You gave us a wonderful overview of lots of things that people could grab onto. And a couple thoughts. I love the nighttime routine. I am a stickler for my nighttime routine, which involves a Epsom salt bath, often a little bit of reading, sometimes a candle, definitely prayer, meditation, gratitude practice. But if you're listening out there, you can find what works for you. You can also find devices where you put red bulbs in the lamp by your bed so there's no blue light coming out. You can change, there's so many apps now with your phone and your a laptop that automatically change at like 6 p.m. so you don't get the blue light. You can buy glasses that are blockers, of course. So there's many ways. And even some people who are EMF sensitive can turn on a master switch to their bedroom so that when they go to bed, their EMFs in their bedroom are shut off or their Wi-Fi during the night is shut off. Those are little things that can make a difference. I also love that you talked about easy ways where you don't have to spend a lot of money. Just this morning, I had put out a mast cell post about a guide that I have for free on Instagram. And a lot of people are super excited and, it's free information about how to help support the mast cell. But one patient on there had wrote in like, I hate that functional medicine's so expensive. What about my family isn't supporting me? Like she was really down. And if I'm honest, kind of victim mentality. And I just said, oh, sweetheart, I'm sorry you're suffering. Because first of all, she's suffering and that's a reason. But the second thing was all about how do you just create safety for yourself? Because when we think about, we can't rely on someone else to do that for us, right? And that's been one of my biggest life lessons is somehow we relegate that to, oh, we need to have these people support us, or we need to have this. And what I've learned is an inside job. And all of this ends up, yes, you can have community. And one thing you mentioned is important. There's studies showing 3 to 5 really close friends make a massive difference in mental health. You don't have to have 12. You don't have to have communities of 100. You have to have 3 to 5 and start with 3. But you also, in this patient's, again, her query, and I was just trying to be kind with the response, but also say, let's think about this differently. Because if you're wanting, everything to be cheap and you don't have to do any work, or you're wanting all the people, your husband, your children to support you, you're going to be disappointed every time because we have no control over those variables, right? So I just tried to gently shift and say, sweetheart, there's things you can do, and here's what I would suggest, and try to practice that myself too. Trauma. You started to talk about that. I want to kind of go there in the end of our conversation here. This is probably the biggest thing you and I both agree that many functional medicine minded practitioners and integrative health practitioners are starting to be open to, but I think it is the next frontier, hands down, the most important thing. And interestingly, last fall I was speaking at a Jeff Bland conference and I was going to talk about mast cell activation and mold and all these things that I always talk about. The night before, I had a deep conversation with Dr. David Perlmutter, and we started talking about love and the heart of medicine and trauma. And we went really deep, really quick. It was a beautiful conversation. That night at like 10 p.m., I'm like, I got to change my presentation tomorrow. And I went up on that stage and it was the basics were there, but the frame was different. And what I did is I talked about how trauma as a child, and I shared some of my own past, had affected my mast cells because those are our primordial responses to aggressive environmental insults, which means they're fear-based, right? So there's a connection to mold, Lyme disease, mast cell activation, as you mentioned, and the trauma in our system that's unhealed. And I shared very deeply, very personal about my own experience and how maybe my cancer, my Crohn's, all of my experience actually went back not only to the mast cells, but to unhealed trauma. And I ended the presentation by saying, if you're out there and you're not asking your patients about trauma and you don't know the resources in your community to help you deal with this, you don't have to be the expert, but you have to ask and you have to start by creating a safe space for your patient. That safety is the foundation of healing. And you know, Kiki, what happened? I had a standing ovation. And the
Oh,
whole conference, I was only, and it wasn't about me, but it was about me listening to that heart place of like, this is so important. And even for you bringing this to the world. So let's just, do you want to talk a little bit about why this is so critical for us to heal our past traumas? Because all the rest is important. But if you feel unsafe in your body, there's no amount of B12 that's going to help that, right?
that's 100% right. And it's interesting because when I started on this journey, it was all about the biochemistry. It was about the nutrient imbalances and the heavy metals and all that. And then gradually, as I progressed, I realized that so much for me was in that triggering event of giving birth and then getting into motherhood because my mother had been a very depressed, very anxious person. And, her mother had killed herself when she was 15 years old. And that was a huge trauma. And she'd been an alcoholic up to that point. And so there was this family legacy in the maternal line of trauma that really got triggered when I gave birth twice. And that was the piece that was really missing. And equally, and so many practitioners that I've spoken to, and we were just talking about this before, they all say, look, you can do all the work that you want from a biochemical perspective. You can heal the gut, you can balance the hormones, you can balance the nutrition, but until you go to that trauma piece and you heal that, or at least you start to, really make progress on it, the biochemical and the physiological piece aren't really going to shift sustainably. And that really is an insight that I think more and more practitioners starting to take on board. And one of the things I'm really aiming to do with this conference is because it's a mental health conference, to bring the trauma world and the
Yes,
functional medicine world together.
yes,
Because, I go to all these conferences trauma conferences. I go to Bessel van der Kolk's conference in Boston. I know I've worked with Dick Schwartz and
yes.
Bessel van der Kolk and Stephen Porges and all these amazing Deb Dana, Dr. Janina Fisher, all these incredible practitioners in the trauma field, but they're very disconnected from the functional medicine field and vice versa. And so one of my goals is really to bring these two worlds together. And I think that's why I'm so excited about having Gabor Maté this year, because he really is, he's a doctor who really buys into the fact that trauma and difficult life circumstances and chronic stress really undermine the physiology and make you prone to so many different chronic illnesses. And so really it's about looking at that piece. And the other interesting piece is that, there's a lot of research around CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy, that's very evidence-based. But what's less evidence-based, but what we now know is so much more impactful, are somatic therapies. And somatic therapies, whether it's somatic experiencing, which is Peter Levine's work, or EMDR, or whether it's breath work, or whether it's trauma release exercises. There are all these different types of therapies, IFS, even Dick Schwartz's, internal family systems, which are much more neurobiological and which work with the body, with the breath, with the nervous system. And we have a huge debt of gratitude towards Stephen Porges, who developed the polyvagal theory, who said, it's not just sympathetic, which is fight, flight, and parasympathetic, which is rest, digest. The parasympathetic also has a freeze component. And so he talks about sort of the ventral vagal, which is the social engagement system, the dorsal vagal, which is the freeze, and then the fight flight. And he's saying, the only way that we can truly heal is by really balancing that nervous system so that we are more in ventral vagal and social engagement than we are in freeze or in fight or flight. And there's a huge body of work that really has been done in this whole trauma piece and looking at the cellular biology. And Just to talk also to bring it back to our world, Dr. Robert Navio, who
Yes.
has worked on the cell danger
Danger
response,
response.
shows that, as you know, that cells basically they're primed once they're attacked by pathogens or toxins and they mount a response. Sometimes the external trigger can disappear, but they're still primed for the cell danger response. And so it's by calming the system down, making it feel safe. You mentioned safety. That is so important. And, Stephen Porges talks so eloquently about the need for safety, the
Yeah.
need to feel safe. And it's not just cognitive because a lot of our trauma is pre-verbal, not only in the sense that a lot of it happened before we could talk, but also it's in a pre-verbal part of our brain. It's in the limbic system. It's not stored in the prefrontal cortex. And so we have to be able to work with the vagus system, with the cranial nerves, with the body in order to heal it because that's where it's stored. We can talk about our trauma until the cows
Yeah.
come home, but until we're actually dealing with it on a somatic level, it's going to be very hard to heal. And the other thing I will say is that a lot of the practitioners that I know who are working in the trauma field, you know, I'm also saying, look, you have to pay attention to functional medicine because you can do all this
Yeah.
therapy for, months and months. But if somebody really has a zinc copper imbalance, or if somebody really has Lyme disease, or they really have mold toxicity, there's only so much, even that somatic therapy and nervous system balancing can do. And so that's why I'm so passionate about bringing these two worlds together and saying, look, to heal mental health sustainably, you have to look at both these areas. But, as we were saying before, childhood trauma can prime you for biochemical insults. And same, biochemical insults can also prime you for trauma. So this is the other fascinating thing, and then I'll be quiet. But if your mother smoked when you were in utero, that's a stressor to the fetus. And they've shown that mothers who smoke when you're in utero, the babies are more primed for stress responses afterwards. And so, events that are traumatic, quote unquote, because, trauma is not in what happens, it's how our body reacts to what happens.
Yes.
And so our body is more likely to react in a stress response way if we've been primed biochemically to be less stress resilient. So the body doesn't know the difference between physiological and psychological stressors. And so, it's very important to look at both and say, okay, these biochemical stressors are priming us to be more susceptible to psychological ones and vice versa, which is why we need to look at both.
Oh, love that so much. And I couldn't agree more as the importance of bringing these all together, which you're doing with IMMH. If you're listening, you're driving, whatever, don't worry. This will be in the show notes. But do you want to just repeat dates, times, and where they can find the website? And then I also want to highlight your podcast because you have an amazing, a lot of these people you know and have talked to on your podcast. So if people want to know more, they can also listen to the podcast.
So IMMH is www.immh.org. It's a not-for-profit, as is Mind Health. So we're very mission-driven. We're non-commercial, and we really just want to advance this information and education in the world. The dates are the 11th to the 14th of September in San Diego, but also online. So if you can't attend in person, there'll also be a virtual option. And then my podcast is the Mind Health 360 show, and I can never remember the URL, but the website is mindhealth360.com. And there I interview some fantastic people, including you, Jill, on different aspects of mental health. And there we really have the full gambit. I'm really building a library across the board of different factors and different approaches, that dysregulate our mental health and also ways of healing. So, yeah, I mean, it's all the podcast is completely free. The website is completely free. Obviously, the conference is not free, but we're not making a profit. We're just doing it, to essentially educate and train. So we're doing it as accessible as we can, given, the expenses of running a conference. But, so it's out there, and it's just we're really excited about being able to offer this.
I am too. And not only is your background perfect for this, but you've done an incredible job at bringing together some of the best minds in this. Yeah, truly. And thank you for today. Thank you for coming on. I look forward to seeing you. Well, I'll see you in London and then, of course, San Diego.
I'm so excited. Thank you so much, Dr. Jill.
Thank you, everyone, for joining me for another episode of Resiliency Radio. I just love Kirkland Newman and all of her passion for mental health. I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you're a practitioner, be sure and check out the IMMH conference. It's really one of the best out there. I go to so many conferences every year, and it's really one of my favorite venues. And as you can see, Kiki has really put together a stellar list of speakers. If you can't go, you can always join online. And either way, if you are there, I hope to see you there in September. As you know, guys, we have over 570,000 subscribers on YouTube. If you haven't yet subscribed, please click and subscribe, hit the bell to be notified of future episodes. And you can join us next week for another episode. We have new episodes coming out every Wednesday, and I look forward to seeing you then. Take care.